Hey guys, so after the rune guide video, a lot of people were commenting that they didn't know when I was building what items, so I thought I'd make a video clearing up all those questions. So I know a lot of you were confused as to what to build, when to build certain items, and how some items compare against each other. So I hope this item guide helps you out with that. If you find this guide useful, don't forget to subscribe, drop a like, drop any questions in the comments below, and I'll try to answer as many as I can. So every game, I'm buying blue Smite to start. It synergizes too well with Rengar, and it'll help you leap further than possible later on when you evolve it. There aren't any other games I see myself starting red or green, since they don't provide that same synergy you can get from blue. I'm currently running the standard assassin build with core items like Duskblade, Essence Reaver, Lord Dominik's, and IE. Sometimes I will opt into other items like Ghostblade or Edge Knight, and we'll talk about that later. When do I rush Duskblade or Ghostblade? I rush Duskblade if I need the extra combat power. It's important to also consider how much you want to delay your later power spikes, which are LDR and IE. I typically rush Ghostblade when I feel strong enough to overpower my enemy without the early Duskblade, and I simply want more movement speed to rotate around the map. Ghostblade is the best item in the game for enabling you to be everywhere on the map and snowball the game. Sometimes you can swap Duskblade with Eclipse if you don't feel strong enough to one-shot their squishies, or you really just want the armor pen if they're stacking a lot of armor. Although keep in mind that if you're building Eclipse, then you're sacrificing a lot of utility in teamfights, and you're missing out on a lot of cooldown reduction, so your ability to snowball games will be harder. Duskblade is a snowball more item. The raw damage on top of the cooldown reduction that the item provides will help you snowball games in 1v9 teamfights, so I build this in most of my games. When do I buy Hydra? So nothing changed. You can still buy Tiamat, Duskblade, Hydra if you want. It's a viable build that offers some pros and cons. Pros are, you'll be much more efficient when you farm camps, and you'll probably keep a level lead over the enemy jungler. Hydra will also allow you to stay on the map longer due to the lifesteal, which will allow you to go for much riskier plays. Hydra will also gain a lot of value if the enemy has a lot of melee champs due to the cleave and the lifesteal. The cons of building Hydra are rushing Tiamat doesn't give you the best stats, and you won't be as strong with your ult at level 6 since you'll be missing those combat stats from Dirk. Building Hydra is really expensive, and it's a horrible item if you fall behind in the game, since a lot of the gold used in purchasing Hydra went into lifesteal and cleave, which is useless when you're behind since you probably don't have enough damage to do anything meaningful, whereas if you invested all your gold into Duskblade and other crit items, you'd still be capable of one-shotting a priority target even when you're behind. And Hydra is also really expensive, so you're delaying your mythic and armor pen power spikes, which can really screw you over if the enemy's team starts stacking armor. So TLDR, it's still a viable build, but Hydra is an item that is really insane when everything works out, but if you start losing control of the game, then it really feels bad. So now let's talk about when I build Edge Knight. Some games require you to build Edge Knight, so it's important to keep on the lookout for champions that can cancel your leap. The main champions are Poppy, Wukong, Janna, Lulu, Zac, and Vex. Now obviously there are many other champions that I didn't list that can cancel your leap, but typically it's much harder for them to reliably do it. So for example, I would never build Edge Knight solely for Nami. Her ult can cancel your leap, but you can just bait it out or jump on her at an angle and she won't be able to react consistently to cancel your leap. You also have to think about how teamfights are going to look, or if teamfights are even going to happen as often as you think, to warrant Edge Knight. So if the enemy has a split pushing top laner, or a comp that is kinda all over the place, then maybe you can live without building it and try and win the game without teamfighting as much. And another question I get is, what do I think about Bruiser Rengar? Honestly, I don't think Bruiser is good for Rengar jungle. You're an assassin that is picking fights 9 out of 10 times, so you want to be building raw damage to end those fights quickly and cleanly. Building health is not going to make your gank stronger, so we should just leave Bruiser Rengar in the top lane. What about Prowler's Claw? Currently Prowler's Claw is simply not as strong as Duskblade or Eclipse, but maybe once in a blue moon I'll consider buying it. The enemy comp has to be extremely dash heavy with something like Nidalee jungle, Wind top, and Vayne AD carry, and they can't also have a lot of armor. Honestly, I don't recommend thinking about building this item unless you're messing around in normals or something. What about Phantom Dancer? I'll build Phantom Dancer when I want to replace my boots, so it's a good item that provides you with crit, attack speed, and movement speed, which are all really nice late game stats. Now I'm going to start answering some questions I get asked a lot in the comments or in my stream. So the first question is Tiamat Hydra Rush worth it even after the nerfs? The cost and stack changes seem to really hurt the item. So yeah, when preseason started, Hydra was one of the strongest items in the game, and you were building it basically every game. Now after the nerfs, you gotta be a little more careful when you buy it. It's still a viable item, but I don't buy it every game. In a different part of the video, I'll talk about the pros and cons of going Hydra. Against team comps with Lulu or heavy shields, do I consider buying Edge Knight? What about Serpent's Fang? If you're against a champion that can cancel your leap, then it's definitely worth going Edge Knight second, just so you can reliably get onto their carries, cause yeah, if they cancel your leap, then it's GG. Serpent's Fang is an interesting item. Although I don't see myself buying Serpents very often, it can be worth building if you're a bit behind gold-wise and the enemy team has a ton of shields, cause yeah, it's a cheap item that really hard counters them. Another big question I get is if I'm building full crit and they are all squishy, do I still recommend going Lord Dominik's third, even if they are building 0 armor items, or is there a more impactful item in that situation? So yeah, if the enemy has 0 armor items and you're just curb stomping them, then you can opt into buying Collector over Lord Dominik's third, and then finish your build with IE fourth and maybe Lord Dominik's fifth. Collector is the only item in the game that offers lethality and crit, so it's an insane item if the enemy is squishy and has no armor. A lot of people have the idea that Collector is always worse than Lord Dominik's, which simply is just not true. I don't know the exact number, but I think it's something like Lord Dominik's outvalues Collector if the enemy has more than 100 armor or something. So always make sure to look if the enemy is building armor before you build Collector. Also, another thing I like about Collector is the fact that it builds out of Dirk, which is extremely cheap power spike that Rengar loves building. Sometimes you're sitting on 1100 gold and you simply can't afford the Last Whisper power spike. Maybe you should consider buying Dirk instead and going towards Collector. If the enemy team has 3 to 4 Bruisers or tanks, and I want to go Bruiser Rengar, is Conqueror better than Lethal Tempo when they have a lot of CC to deny autos, or do I still go Lethal to be able to proc Bork, for example, more often? It's important to consider how often you see yourself attacking in teamfights, because it plays a huge role when you decide Conqueror or Lethal Tempo. If the enemy team is mainly ranged, then I'll probably lean towards Conqueror, due to the fact that I'll just get kited and I won't be able to auto as much as I want to. Now, let me answer the Bruiser half of the question. The only viable Bruiser build I see myself going in the jungle is a bit different than your idea of Bruiser. The only Bruiser item I see myself buying is Death's Dance, and I'll explain why. First item you want to buy is Tiamat, then your Mythic Eclipse. Typically, I lean towards Eclipse more than Duskblade in this build, because you'll be playing the role of Assassin and Bruiser. So the raw damage from Eclipse will help you assassinate squishies and shred tanks, while also providing you some much needed Omnivamp to stay in the fight. After Eclipse, finish your Hydra, which will provide you with even more damage, and Omnivamp, which will help you stay alive even more. And then third, this is where you can fit in Death's Dance. Death's Dance by itself can make you a tank. This item is one of the most broken items in the game, and it's been meta-defining for a long time. This item will provide you with all the tankiness needed to become a full-on Bruiser that can tank loads of damage. You don't need to build any other Bruise item after this, so we'll continue building damage items such as Lord Dominik's, which fits really nice into the build because Death's Dance doesn't actually provide any health, so you'll get the full Giant Slayer value from Lord Dominik's. Then you can build Phantom Dancer, which will give you the necessary crit to build IE next, while also providing the movement speed you're about to lose from selling boots for IE. Attack speed is also a really nice stat with this build because you have so much lifesteal, and it'll just feel really nice to get so many auto attacks off. Now finally, to complete the build, you'll want to sell your boots for IE. So yeah, it's basically a standard assassin build, but you're opting into Death's Dance to provide the tankiness needed to be a frontliner, and stay long enough in the fight to kill tanks. You mentioned the Dirk buy after your first recall, however some games have noticed that you buy Tiamat, so my question is how do you decide which you get on the first back? For the past couple of days, I've been leaning more towards skipping Hydra altogether, and going for either Ghostblade to snowball my lead, or straight up rushing my Mythic. If you're a big Hydra fan, then you can continue buying the item. It's not a bad item per se, but it definitely has some pros and cons, which I've talked about somewhere in this video. Tiamat simply isn't as strong as Dirk Rush in terms of raw damage, so lately I've been opting into the raw damage from Dirk just to push my lead, especially with my ult at level 6. If you're confused about what runes to pair with what builds, then make sure to check out my rune guide I just made for Season 13, and see you guys later, good luck on your climb.